Hey, so welcome here to another version of Icon Vehicle Dynamics training. And we're here with Scott Spiva with Icon Vehicle Dynamics.
Yeah, we'll talk a little about JKs and JLs and JTs and all the acronyms.
Scott, why don't we start with the shocks and the springs? That's your basic starting point getting into a full suspension system, right?
Totally, yeah, that's the guts of it, you could really say. So like we're going to start out with our springs here. Comparatively to stocks, they are quite a bit longer, so for more travel of the suspension. So travel being referred to from distance from your full extension point to your full compress point in the suspension. More travel is better. It's like horsepower. I refer to it as for your suspension. It gives it more room to work and more room to do that work and slow all that movement down. So the more you have, generally the better everything works. Part of the magic of the springs is the fact that we try to run dual rates or triple rates whenever possible. That gives you multi-sections of the spring that have different stiffnesses, you could say, or different spring rates. Easiest way to see it would be the tighter windings up here at the top of this coil versus the bottom. This is your softer section. In reality, when it's cycling, they're compressing together. It's not like this one only moves first and then this moves secondly, but eventually at a certain point through the travel, this will bind up and basically transition the spring rate from that soft rate to the stiffer rate, which is better for performance handling, but it still gives you that soft ride quality around town and everything like that, so you're not beating yourself up all the time.
And then once you take a look at this being a general offering, you're going to get into your shock choices, right?
Absolutely. The spring is, it's what's holding the truck up, but the shock itself is really the biggest piece of the puzzle, because that's really what you're kind of setting your shock choices based on how you're using the truck is the best way to look at it.
Okay, perfect.
There's so many different options for shocks, and in reality, they're all going to ride good. It's just really about what you need them to do.
Give me a quick overview on, I need a 2.0, or what am I doing that gets me to a 2.5 with the reservoir?
Okay, so you got our basic stock shock here. This would be the rear out of a JL. All the JK, the JTs, they all look pretty much the same. This is what you typically is a twin tube shock absorber. Not a whole lot of performance, very soft. You can compress them easily by hand, that sort of thing. There's not much pressure inside, so they're not capable of doing a lot of work. If you're, say, looking for better ride, a little bit of trail duty, nothing crazy, you're not really going to beat up the Jeep or something, a 2-inch shock is excellent choice. You'll see that it's not really that much bigger than the stock one, but this is a monotube shock absorber. So what you can't see is inside here, there's a piston that separates the oil, which is basically from here down, and this is the nitrogen reservoir. And compared to this, there's a cylinder within a cylinder. So you get a much smaller piston working inside there, so it's not able to do as much work as this guy is, even though they're about the same size. And you can see the difference in length that I was talking about earlier too, that's tuned to go with the springs to get as much travel.
Bottom line is just a better looking shock. So it's time to lose that and go to something really cool. But if you want to take it to the next level, where are you going with the 2.5?
So the 2.5-inch shock is the next step up. This is really what we do all of our tuning off of. This is what we consider our baseline. Once we get it riding the way we want, we actually go back and tune the 2.0s and everything else to match it. But the bigger shocks are going to give you a much higher heat capacity. So if you're working the shocks harder, you're putting more heat into the shocks than they're able to necessarily bleed back into the air quickly enough, they can fade on you. And that's something you'll experience definitely on a stock shock. Or on a smaller shock like the 2.0, say without a reservoir. It's not real hard to find that point if you try. A 2.5 though, I mean this is race shock size here. You've got to physically try to overheat the shock, and it's
so you can put a reservoir on the 2.0. You can go single 2.0 with reservoir, then you go to the 2.5 with reservoir as well.
Correct. Most of the 2.5s will inherently have the reservoirs, and we do it for a couple different reasons. Kind of the cool thing about our 2.5s compared to most is that they all pretty much have an internal bump zone built in. And that has to do with how we tie the reservoir into the shock body about, what's a third of the way down the cylinder here? So it splits up the shock into 2 zones. So as it's compressing, once your piston gets up above this manifold, it's about a 20% ramp up in damping force right before you bottom out, and then also to help control that bottom out too, so you don't just slap it and bounce off of that bump or whatever. And this is also tuned in conjunction with the ramp up of our dual rates. So right about the same time that the spring is ramping up into that secondary rate, your piston is crossing over into that bump zone, so you get more oomph to control that hit.
And that's where that important travel starts to come in, based on the vehicle, based on your wheels, your tires, your weight, and everything else. Now you can buy these individually, basically put them on, or we get into a total system with Icon suspension system. Let's go through a couple others here and walk us through what the next steps are as you start building the total system to throw Icon on the vehicle.
Yeah, so if you're looking at the systems, we call them stages. Stages. So the number of stages will vary depending on the truck we're talking about. Like most of the Jeep stuff, we're in 8, 9, I think. But it's really just as you go higher, it's the same stuff. It's the same springs in stage 1 all the way through stage 8 or whatever, but you're just adding on the other components like the bigger shocks, different control arms. And you'll generally see as you go higher in the stages, that's a higher performance kit. That's where the bigger shocks come in, and you start to see this, like the links and the track bars and everything come into play. What the links are going to give you is really, if you're wheeling the truck, it's going to really improve the overall flexibility of the suspension. This is a stock link from the front of a JL or a JT. So you can see there's nothing real crazy
about it. Nothing too sexy about that.
Not at all.
Looks like it works.
Yeah, it's got
in the right direction.
Yeah, it's got a bonded bushing here that you can tell that this is not going to want to flex very much under, when you're rock crawling or just
not at all.
Yeah. So
stiff.
Instead, we replace it with one of our versions here. This is our tubular style. So depending on which link we're talking about, it'll either have dual durometer bushings on either end, or a bushing on one end and a Heim joint on the other.
Dual durometer. We go into 3.0 and 4.0 in training before we get to durometer. Is that correct? Is that right?
I mean, basically, durometer just means hardness.
Okay.
Of how squishy it is.
Right.
Makes it want to flex easier, but then at a certain point it gets stiffer. So that way it allows it to move, but then still being nice and sturdy under maximum articulation, so you're not just blowing your bushing out.
Perfect.
Also, too, since we're talking about it, it's kind of neat because the sleeve in the center is not bonded to the bushing like it is here. So it's actually separated with some Teflon, and it can actually move and pivot independently. So it's just a much more free unit than this guy.
So again, the more wheeling, the heavier you're getting into that type of sport. These type of changes through Icon is what really helps you get through a hard day on the rocks, a hard day on the trail, maybe even in some racing applications.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. That bind that these bushings are going to give you, if you're really flexing it out, I mean, it will work, but you tend to see stress components. You'll blow out these bushings over time. I've seen plenty of stock components twist and fail under extreme scenarios, or in the more extreme, I've seen the factory links on the axles and everything rip off from that bind. You got to figure that's the weakest point in all of this, and so if something's going to go, it's usually that. Perfect. So by giving the freedom of movement for everything to kind of get out of the way, it'll just go further and easier, and everything will be less stressed. So we don't offer the billet links for every Jeep app, just because you'll see, for example, the stock one here, it's got a bend in it. And so it takes quite a bit of aluminum to just getting rid of that to make it. So that's the main reason why we don't. But this is like for the rear of the Gladiator, and we offer these for many other applications besides the Gladiator. But what makes the billet fancier than the tube link is its method of adjustment. They're both adjustable, but your typical tube link is your traditional. You loosen this jam nut and you spin your rod end out, tighten it back down, and you bolt it back on the truck. So a little bit more labor intensive to set it all up and everything. The billet link, however, adjusts much easier. It can be done while it's bolted on the truck. You just loosen these 2 pinch bolts right here and then spin the sleeve. Perfect. And it'll automatically adjust the length uniformly. So it's a very quick setup. It can be done on the alignment rack. And if you ever change your setup, like your ride height, or you need to adjust pinion angle or front end caster on certain applications, it gives you a much easier way to do that, where you can a lot of times do it yourself without having to take it to professional.
All right, so we've got most of the Icon stage system here. Once you get, what are we missing that we're not showing at this point that gets you to that 6, 7, 8 in the stage? So
we have our 2.5-inch diameter shock here.
Yep.
The one shown is just our remote reservoir without any sort of adjustment. Well, we would just refer to this as a remote reservoir with the bump zone. We also offer them with what we call the CDC valve, which is a adjustable valve. Yep. There's a knob that lives right here on the reservoir. You turn. Very easy to use. You get 10 settings of compression adjustment. Basically, the number 4 setting would be tuned to be the same as this shock. So you can be 3 settings softer than our standard tune, or 6 settings firmer for more performance, or if you want to go faster.
Perfect.
Then above that, our latest and greatest, we call the CDE valve, which takes what the CDC valve does with your manual adjustment and takes that all electronic. You set up the same general sort of settings that you have control of on the shock, but you have the control over the algorithms that the system is running to control how aggressively it ramps up the shocks, and it will automatically take the shocks softer or firmer based on your settings and keep the ride consistent.
Thank you for watching today. This is the Jeep suspension system overview. Continue to watch. We've got more on Toyota, Ford. We've got some wheels we're going to bring up. We look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.